everybody, and welcome back to another video by Funlearn Tutorials. So last week we were discussing about the don'ts when writing a paper as a student, and in today's video I'm going to be continuing with it and looking on the more positive side. I'm going to be talking about the do's when writing a paper as a student. So let's first start with the first point that we have here. If I could just bring it out so literature review, objectives, methodology. What I mean by that, basically, I think I have one more line to go with that. Yes, I have. So let me just bring out everything. I think that's it. So what I mean by that is basically sort of connected to these first few points. So when you're writing a paper, as I mentioned in my last video, you first look for data, then you see whether you have suitable data to work with or not, run a couple of tests and sort of look into the basic ideas of what the data is portraying and interpret it in your own way for your topic and see if you can work with that. And then you start writing the literature review. Why? Because as you write your literature review, you come across papers that have dealt with topics that are similar to yours, and then you kind of get idea as to how to move on from the point that you're standing in. Then you write the objectives, because once you write the literature review, you sort of have a very brief idea, but like a very broad idea of what are the things that could be done given the data that you have, and what are the works that have been done in this scenario. So you can be motivated from those itself and can sort of come up with objectives that you want to do. So you have things that have been done, and then you can sort of work on your way and come up with what you want to do. Then once you know what you want to do, the next question is how would you do it. So that gets covered in methodology. And then once you're over with that, then you can sort of, so basically you do the literature review, and then you do the objectives and motivation, then you do the data and methodology, and then everything that follows in the analysis and interpretation. So I was discussing about part 1 of this video, and I was sort of discussing about a couple of points. So I'm going to link them in the corner as well as in the description box as always. Go check it out if you haven't, because the don'ts are more important than the do's. So yeah, basically after that you write the introduction, abstract and conclusion. Always remember these three things come at the very end. When you've written your entire paper, you have your analysis complete, you have your interpretations, you have everything that can be done, and you're very happy with what your paper has turned out to be. Then you go ahead and write the introduction. So you sort of transport yourself back to the past, and of course you don't write the results. You sort of think, okay, this is what I was going for when I still hadn't started my paper yet, and then you write the introduction, and then you move on to the conclusion and say, okay, now I have written the conclusion. You transport yourself back to the present time and write about your interpretations and your results in short, not in detail, because that is the analysis portion. And then you write the abstract. The abstract is sort of like, if introduction and conclusion had a baby, that would be the abstract. You sort of get the results, but not quite there. You sort of kind of graze over the results. So yes. Then let's move on to the next topic. It was so small, I don't remember. Introduce a future prospect. Now it's not always true. Not all papers can have a future prospect, but it's always a good idea to include that, because when you're writing papers as a student, it's more often than not part of a coursework, and well, you don't have all the time in the world to finish your paper. So there could be reasons, in fact that could be a very good point. So somewhere in your paper you can fit in due to paucity of time. So let me just give you this phrase, due to paucity of time, or paucity. Due to paucity of time, basically it means you have lack of time. Sorry, I think I was right. Yes, I was right. So basically you have lack of time. So because you did not have time, you couldn't work with something else, or you couldn't work with an extended issue. And then you can mention what could be done if you had more time in your future prospect. So that actually, if there's a question coming up, you can actually refer to this point and say, I had this idea, but because I didn't have time, I couldn't work on it. Then let me uncover. Another thing that I would like to mention is I should have written this in the don'ts, but basically this is why you should look at all of my videos, because I tend to cross connect between different videos. Another thing that you shouldn't do is try to answer everything. This is, I don't know if it's true for everybody, but it was true for me. I used to try to incorporate everything that I find. So I would imagine myself being an external paper and reading my paper and finding out faults. So suppose I write a sentence and I say, okay, what should you do if this happens, and then I try to explain that as well. If somebody were to ask me what this happens, the issue is, if you do that, your paper will become exceedingly long, and that is not very plausible. Sometimes it's not reasonable. Besides, ideally speaking, you should leave scope for some questions, because if you are about to present a paper, you would want easier questions to be asked, right? So if you have something very obvious, something that can, like something, a sentence that is begging someone to ask a question, you would ideally want that there, so that the people who are judging your paper can actually ask you questions from there, and then you can answer that. So don't try to answer everything. You would ideally want to leave some places where questions can be answered, so that you know what questions can be answered. If you try to answer everything, the judges probably will come up with questions that you haven't thought of, and that will probably worse than the situation that you were trying to avoid. So yes, don't try to answer everything. This is just my personal preference, of course. I'm not sure if everybody thinks that way. So let me just, I don't know why, but I can't seem to, let me just uncover everything. Okay, so I just uncovered everything. So the third point is interpret the observations and results. As I mentioned, simply write down the observations and results is a big no-no. So you have to interpret the results and observations and sort of find out what the implications are. The fourth point is avoid calculation intricacies or specifications. As I mentioned in my previous video, I had written my last paper where I hadn't mentioned a single equation as far as I can remember. I did mention tests, of course, I did mention the results, but not in mathematical form. So not H naught is this, H1 against H1 is this, and I accept H naught against H1 with this level of significance. Avoid these, because if someone is reading your paper, personally, I prefer reading papers that don't make me feel like I don't know anything. So if you write a lot of mathematical intricacies, it feels very core academic, and I personally view academics as a very fun experience. So learning how the world works, economics is basically learning how the world works, right? So if you're writing a consumption function and your entire paper is dealt with, make sure that your paper looks like an economics paper and not a mathematics paper, right? So that is basically what I'm going for. It's not something that you should do or something that you should make sure that you do, but these are just little things that I like. So I try to avoid writing equations, or avoid going for very complicated mathematical equations or calculations or something. And then acknowledge all sources and references. I mentioned this before as well, regarding, maybe I was discussing about my literature review. Do not hesitate to say that you have read this or read that, or you have referred for an idea from this particular website. You're a student. My entire video is about writing a paper as a student. I have written papers as a student. So it's not wrong for you to refer to resources and refer to papers and actually look up things. Ideally, you would want to look for authentic papers that have been published in reputed journals, or just papers that you can look up in Google Scholar, and then you can refer them in your bibliography section. So you can, even when you're writing your paper, you can actually go ahead and sort of keep a track of everything that you're writing, and then at the end of the paper, when everything is written, you can sort of organize everything based on alphabetical order of the authors or year or whatever you're going for. But you can sort of keep your bibliography as a page where you actually keep tally of everything that you're going for. ideally, again, as I was saying, ideally you would want to go for, okay, focus that. Ideally, you would go for reputed journals and papers written by esteemed people, and not websites like Britannica or Times of India, but a couple of sentences maybe won't hurt. And you would also want to, okay, if you're taking extensive data from a particular website, acknowledge that particular data source as well. So if I have always taken data from Databank World Bank, so my bibliography always has Databank World Bank written in it, because that is also a place where I take my data from. And I think if you download the Excel file, there's also a link, or I'm not sure, there's a link somewhere through either the Databank website, like the web page itself, or in the Excel file, Excel file that you can download from, and you can link to the definitions of the variables that you take. So that can also be a source, because you are actually using those data variable names and the definitions of the particular variables in your paper. So you can acknowledge that as well, and I think you should, because I usually did. So there are the do's are pretty straightforward, but I am very passionate about the don'ts. I make sure that I don't do things that I don't like. So just a quick disclaimer, as I think I had made in my previous writing paper video as well. These are what I have been following every time I write a paper. I haven't been penalized for anything as of yet, and I have had a reasonably good score in all the papers that I have written. So I think they are not incorrect. However, take everything with a grain of salt. This is from my personal experience. It's not like a professor came up and told me these do's and don'ts. A very big addition to these do's and don'ts is follow your professor's instructions. Your professor can give you specifications that you need to follow, and that if that directly contradicts or even slightly contradicts what I have said, of course follow your professor. Your professor is the one who is going to check your paper. He or she is the one who is going to guide you in your endeavor, and so of course if there are any contradictions, follow your professor. But in case you have some lack of idea and you would want some clarity, you can go for these 5 points and sort of track your way, and then you can decide if there's some false or something that you need to ask, and then you can go to your professor and ask them. So I hope these 2 videos will help you or helped you in future to write your paper, and I hope you have a lovely experience in writing papers, and see you.